to Middleborough. Ooh, sorry about that. Welcome to Middleborough High School and Carver High School's combined efforts for Financial Aid Night this year, 2017. Just letting everybody get seated. So tonight we have invited a speaker from MEFA, which is Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, and she actually volunteers with MEFA to do these presentations about financial aid and about FAFSA at many high schools around the state, and her full-time job is at Boston University. She is a director in senior assistant director in the financial aid office. So her name is Christina Coviello. Welcome. And before I let her speak and give you all the great information, I also want to introduce, do we have any people here from Carver tonight? Okay, we have a few, good. So up in the back we have Chrissy McKenna. She is one of the guidance counselors in Carver, and my name is Amy Byrne, and I'm one of the guidance counselors here at the high school. So just a couple of quick questions. How many of you, if you can just raise your hands, have been to part 1, 2, 3, and now this is part 4 of our junior/senior college application process evening programs? Okay. How many have been to at least one other than this? Okay. All right, thank you. So without further ado, I have Christina Coviello. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Christina. As Amy said, I actually work at Boston University. I'm a senior assistant director there. I've been at BU for a little over 11 years. I do love giving these financial aid presentations. I especially like coming to Middleborough. Paul Brannigan is actually a close friend of mine. I did student council. I still do student council, so I feel like a little nostalgic when I come back to Middleborough. But we do have a lot to get through tonight, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started with that. This presentation tonight is actually going to be really timely for those of you that have seniors. The FAFSA is actually available right now. But for those of you that do have juniors or other younger students, it's really just kind of nice to be aware of what's going on and kind of get yourself ready for the future. We will take about an hour or so, give or take. There'll be some time at the end for questions. There's actually quite a bit of material to get through, so I'll ask that you hold questions until the end of the presentation, but we'll definitely have plenty of time for questions at the end, so you can save those at that point. All right. So just a little bit about MEFA, first of all. So MEFA has a public service mission to help families navigate through college financing. That's done through community outreach, savings plans, and educational loans. Has anyone ever accessed any of the MEFA online resources or tools? A couple people? Yeah, so great way to start, and actually there's, on that evaluation form that you got on the bottom, if you do fill out your name and email address, they'll register you for the MEFA email, so you'll be made aware if there are additional seminars going forward throughout the year to kind of help you later on in the college process. The MEFA Pathway tool is also really great for families that do have those younger students. It's a nice online interactive tool. Students can, I think, start to build a resume, think about different topics they might be interested in studying when they're in college. So for those of you that do have younger students, the MEFA Pathway tool is really great to kind of get going for those younger kids. All right, so a little bit about our agenda tonight. We're going to talk about basics of financial aid, different types and sources. We'll talk about how decisions are made, how you pay, and then free resources that are going to be available to you. So first of all, types and sources of financial aid. Financial aid is money to help students pay for college. Comes in 3 types: grants and scholarships. That's the best kind. That's the money you don't have to pay back. Work study, which is something that the student will earn on a weekly basis based on the number of hours that they're working. That's something that's not going to come off the bill, but rather it's for the students' incidental expenses. I like to say it's the pizza and shampoo money that the students will need while they're in school. And then lastly, loans. And then those federal student loans do have a lot of great repayment options for students, special terms, lower interest rates. So those are good loans to take advantage of. So there's different types of financial aid, and the first one that I'll talk about is merit aid. And merit aid is awarded to students based on some factor. So whether that's academic or athletic or artistic, it's a way for the school to draw that student and entice them to come to that school with that merit scholarship. Not all schools offer merit scholarships, so I would encourage you to take a look at each individual school's website, see if merit scholarships are available, see if there's additional forms or sometimes an additional essay that might be required if the student is applying for a specific merit scholarship. Don't miss any of those deadlines. I'm going to kind of be speaking a little bit from a Boston University perspective tonight in terms of the way that we do things, but I know that deadlines are super important at Boston University and really kind of for all schools. So if the deadline for a specific merit award is November 1st, then make sure that you have all of your forms in and essays in by that November 1st deadline. It is pretty competitive is the other thing too. There's a lot of students that are usually competing for a small number of merit awards at each institution if they do have it. In addition to institutional merit that some of the private institutions might have, there's also the Adams Scholarship, and that's based on MCAS scores. That covers tuition at public schools. Students must submit a FAFSA to be eligible for that and maintain a 3.0 GPA. The majority of financial aid is what we call need-based financial aid. And that's determined by a calculation that's determined by the information that you input into the FAFSA application. Most aid is actually awarded this way rather than on those merit factors. Again, students do need to maintain satisfactory academic progress, and the federal standard for that is a 2.0 GPA and 12 credits per semester to make sure that students are making progress towards graduation. So there are 4 primary sources of financial aid. The first is through the federal government, state, the college or university, and then other outside agencies. Federal and state grants are often awarded to lower income families, and then the merit aid can really kind of be awarded to anyone based on the achievements of that student. For students that are interested in outside scholarships and outside awards, now is actually a good time to start looking at those. There's some information on MIFA's website. Again, probably all of the colleges and universities link out to certain FastWeb, a good call, where students can apply for outside scholarships online. There's also a scholarship process here. So yeah, so there's a lot of money that's on the table there, and really kind of the early bird gets the worm, I think, when it comes to a lot of those outside scholarships through different agencies. So again, really kind of encouraging your students to do just a little bit of homework and take a look at what those outside scholarships are. It's a really great opportunity. So, according to the College Board Trends in Student Aid Report, which is actually from 2016, more than $184 billion was awarded to undergraduate students in the 15-16 academic year. 65% of that is made up of grants, loans, work study, and federal tax credits. So again, there's a lot of money out there that's available for students, but it is important that you fill out the necessary paperwork to be eligible. So we're going to talk a little bit about the application process. First thing, just to state really, is to try to get organized when you're thinking about when you're going to do the FAFSA or when you're going to do the profile. Take a look at each school's website. I like to say, like, make a spreadsheet, list all of the schools, list what the requirements are, whether it's only the FAFSA, whether it's the FAFSA and the profile, whether they have a third application or some other form that the student needs to fill out. Line up those dates and deadlines of when that application is due. Just kind of getting organized is a good place to start, and that's something you definitely can start working on now. And to stress, deadlines are so important, and to not wait until you are accepted to apply for financial aid. I cannot tell you the number of students that I've met with in April, and they say, and they have no financial aid application at all on file, and they say, oh, I'm so excited, to come here, and, what do I do to apply for financial aid? And then I have to say to them, it's April 15th, and our deadline was actually February 1st. So we've run out of money. So really the deadlines are super, super important. So really making sure that you don't wait until you're admitted. The financial aid and the admissions applications go hand in hand. You're doing them at the same time. Make sure you're just following all of those deadlines. Also, just make sure that you are using a phone number or an email on those forms that you're going to be checking. Sometimes a school may be looking at some information. It might look like the information is conflicting, or they want a little more backup, kind of explaining some of the numbers that are on the form. So please do, if you do get a phone call or an email from a school, respond to them and make sure that all that information is clarified, because again, that can hold up the process as well. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, and it's free. So you do want to get that at FAFSA.gov. So if there's other websites that link you out somewhere else and they ask you to pay for it, not the right website, FAFSA.gov. And it is required for all state and federal aid. It's easiest to do online. I think 99% of people do the form online. There is some skip logic in there built in, so as you're answering questions, if they know that there will be questions that won't apply to you, it'll skip those. The data will be saved automatically. You will need to get an FSA ID in order to electronically sign the FAFSA. You can go ahead and get that right now. You do need a valid email address to get that FSA ID. The other thing I want to talk about is the IRS data retrieval tool, the DRT. We talk about that quite a bit. It's a really easy way to input your tax data into the FAFSA. So as you're filling out the FAFSA, it'll ask you, would you like to use the IRS data retrieval tool? You can select yes, pops you out to the IRS website, and then all of the pertinent tax information will go directly from your previous year's tax return into the FAFSA. You may have seen in the news, there were some problems with the data retrieval tool last year, or if any of you have students that are older, you may have seen that. They did make those corrections. When you do the IRS data retrieval tool now, what you're going to see on the FAFSA for security purposes is just going to be, I think it's the words that say, withdrawn or through the IRS, taken from the IRS data. The number actually won't be visible there, and that's a security that they instituted this year for that. The FAFSA does need to be completed every year to be eligible for federal aid, and it also needs to be completed for every student. I met with a family once, and they had twins, and they said, oh, we did the FAFSA for twin A, and we just thought that it would magically, populate into the second student's file, and it's not. That doesn't happen. So if you do have twins or triplets, you do need to fill out an individual FAFSA for each student. That data won't be transferred to siblings. If you're interested in having a little bit of additional help doing the FAFSA, there are a number of FAFSA day events run throughout the state. There's a couple actually in this area. I think they are mostly in the fall. I think there's one that's in January. But the FAFSA is available now, and so you can take a look at that on the FAFSA Day website, and it'll give you the different dates and locations for those events if you do feel like you need a little more hands-on help with that. Basically, a financial aid professional will come in, give a little presentation about the FAFSA, and then typically the event will be held in a computer lab, and you'll be able to input the information right there and file the FAFSA on that day. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can take a look at the different events that are available across the state. Again, just stressing the deadlines. Every school may have a different deadline for their institutional funding, but in order to be eligible for any state aid, the FAFSA does need to be completed by May 1st. That's well past the deadline for many of the private institutions, so if your student is applying to private schools, make sure that you're looking at what those earlier deadlines are. So what information is going to be reported on the FAFSA? So first of all, the citizenship status. Student needs to be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. Students can send the FAFSA to up to 10 schools. Does anyone have students who are thinking of applying to more than 10 schools? There's always a couple. So if the student does end up that they want to apply to 11 schools, what you would do is fill out the FAFSA, complete the list of 10 schools, wait until the transaction is transferred into the schools and the school receives that information. Then the student can log back into the FAFSA, delete one school, and add that additional school if there are more than 10. Schools actually can't see other colleges that are listed. So I always get the question, is there a way to order them? The school only sees the transaction for their individual schools. So if the student has applied to 10 schools, the school can't see what those other 9 schools are. FAFSA will ask questions about student and parent assets from income from 2016 and the current assets. So we're going to be using the prior year's tax information, but current assets for the family. It'll also ask about the number of people living in your household, and then the number of people in that household who are currently in college. It will ask for information from both parents, regardless of their gender or marital status, as long as they live together in the same household. If the parents are divorced or separated, and there are 2 separate households, the FAFSA will only ask information from what we call the custodial parent. And that's determined by the parent that the student lives with more than 50% of the time. And if the time is exactly 50% with both parents, the information you'll put on the FAFSA is the parent who provides more financial support. So in addition to the FAFSA, a lot of schools, especially the private universities that do have institutional funding, also will request the College Board CSS profile application. It's going to ask basically the same questions, but a few more in-depth questions regarding assets specifically. Home equity becomes a factor, any family business becomes a factor in the profile application. So same basic questions about income, assets, number in your household, and number in college. The asset questions just go into a little bit more depth. And again, this is used mostly by schools that do have institutional funding to give to students. And then in addition, the profile application will ask for information from both parents. So if the parents are in a divorced or separated situation, each parent will fill out a separate application form. So one parent who we've determined was the custodial parent on the FAFSA will go in and fill out one version of the profile, and then the non-custodial parent, who the student lives with less than 50% of the time, will fill out a second CSS profile. Unfortunately, the unwillingness or refusal of either parent to not fill out any of the forms is not a reason. There are some instances where the non-custodial parent information may be waived, but you'd want to check with each individual school to see what their process is for that. MIFA actually has a webinar that'll be available online that goes through different aspects of the profile specifically. So again, if you sign up for their mailing list, they'll notify you of when that webinar is available, and you can go ahead and take a look at that and get some help with the profile as well. Where the FAFSA is free, the profile does have a fee associated with it. It's $25 for the first school that the student applies to, and then $16 for each additional school. Another important thing to note kind of on all of these applications, the profile and the Common App do not require that the student add their social security number to the application. I recommend, or we in the financial aid world recommend, that students do put their social security number both on the Common App, the FAFSA, and the profile. It's difficult for schools to link all of that application data if we don't have that social security number. So we do encourage students to include their social security number on all of those applications, just as a way to kind of help staying with the timelines and making sure that we can link up that complete application. Additionally, some schools may require tax returns. Some schools will request it kind of right up front, early in the spring, and then other schools will request it after the student has decided to enroll there. Some students may also be selected for federal verification, and in that case, if you haven't used the IRS data retrieval tool, you will need to get an IRS tax transcript. I was actually in a training a couple of weeks ago, and one of my colleagues said that he recommends families, as they're kind of doing the FAFSA, go right out and just request a tax transcript now, just in case you need it. I think the IRS is not always the fastest in terms of getting turning that information around, so if you want to go ahead and get that tax transcript now and have that ready, that's something you certainly can do. All right, so after you apply, the information from the applications will be processed centrally and then sent to the schools and the State Office of Financial Aid. The student will receive a SAR, or a student aid report, and I just encourage students and families to take a look at that student aid report, make sure that everything that you've entered is accurate. I've had students sometimes forget a zero and add an extra zero, transpose some numbers, so make sure that that information is accurate, and then if you do need to go make any changes, you can take a look at that at that point. If you do need to make changes to the FAFSA, you can log in electronically and make those changes. Another transaction will be produced, and that will be sent to the schools that are on that list. If you do have to make changes to the profile, I would recommend that you just call the school directly or send them an email. They may have a different form for how they make changes to the profile application. And again, just encouraging you to check email and voicemail throughout this process so that if the schools do contact you, you can get back to them in a timely manner. If you feel like your family has special circumstances, when you're filling out the FAFSA, it's literally just the numbers. When you're filling out the profile, it's just the numbers, and then they give you a tiny little box, and you can write a couple of sentences about any special circumstances that the family has. If there was a job loss, if there was an illness that required, a lot of medical bills, any of those kind of special circumstances that aren't reflected in the tax return, I would encourage you to write a letter, reach out to each school individually, provide some backup documentation, and talk about what those circumstances are. Schools kind of have the authority to make what we call professional judgments on some of those special circumstances. So if that is something that has impacted your family, go ahead and reach out to each school individually and let them know what that is. So now talking about kind of how the decisions are made. So we're going to talk first about the cost of attendance. And so when we think of cost of attendance, it's actually more than the billed expenses that you'll receive from the institution. So the blue boxes you can see is the tuition and fees and the room and board. Those are going to be the items that the school will bill you for. In addition to that, students will also have to pay money for books and supplies, transportation costs, other personal expenses, that pizza and shampoo I'm talking about. So all of that encompasses the total cost of attendance, and that's going to vary at each school. The expected family contribution is the EFC. We'll talk about that quite a bit in the financial aid office, and that's an indicator of the family's overall financial strength, not an assumption of how the family will pay for school. So I do feel like families sometimes take a look at that expected family contribution and say, well, there's no way I could write a check for this amount. But it's really kind of talking about your overall financial strength and your ability to absorb those costs over time. The same federal formula is used for all families, but the FAFSA and the profile will calculate different expected family contributions. As I said, the profile does ask some additional questions, so it's very likely that you'll see a different expected family contribution as a result of the FAFSA and the profile. Just to remind you that the primary responsibility of paying for college does sit with the family, and you will often pay more than what that expected family contribution is. We'll go through a couple of examples of that. The formula does protect a portion of the income, a portion of the assets, but personal debt is not a factor in the calculation. For those of you that do have juniors or other younger students, you can check out the FAFSA Forecaster or other EFC calculators that are online. Again, for those of you that have seniors, I wouldn't waste your time with any of those calculators. I would just jump right in and spend that time actually filling out the forms. In addition to the FAFSA calculators, there are also net price calculators that every school is required to have on their site. These are anonymous. It's a tool that's provided by institutions. It's not going to give you an exact figure in terms of what you can expect in terms of a financial aid award, but it can give you a little bit of a ballpark. So again, it's a nice tool for you if you do have younger students, but if you have seniors, I would just go ahead and do the forms at this point. So to determine eligibility for financial aid, schools take their total cost of attendance, subtract the expected family contribution, and then the remaining amount is how much the student will be eligible for financial aid. Schools then try to fill that eligibility with aid from a number of different sources, but you really want to look at that eligibility, and that is going to vary at every school depending on the total cost of attendance. So I'll go through a couple of examples here. So this is actually an example of how the assets will impact the expected family contribution. Assets are the total value of any checking and savings accounts that you have, investments, businesses, farms, 529 plans, and there is a asset protection allowance that's built into the calculation, and the calculation is highly income driven. So if you go ahead and take a look at this example, you can see that the income for the three families is going to be the same in each example, and the assets will increase from 0 to 75,000 to 150,000. And you can see that the difference in the expected family contribution as a result of an additional $75,000 in savings is really only impacting the expected family contribution by less than $3,000. So it is a highly income-driven calculation, and having saved for college and having those assets available to help pay for college is a good thing. So here's the same chart. We're just going to change the income instead. So as I said, income is going to be more highly driven in this calculation. Income consists of taxable and non-taxable earnings. And like I said, it is assessed at a higher rate than the assets. So in this example, we have the three families that will have the same assets of $50,000, but you can see that the income is $75,000, $100,000, and $150,000. And as you go from family A to family B, an additional $25,000 in income translates to an additional almost $8,500 in the expected family contribution. So it is a more highly income-driven calculation. Again, the expected family contribution is not a factor that we say you should just be able to write a check for, but more about how much you can absorb those educational costs over time. I just want to stress to you, don't take a look at these charts and say, oh, I fall into this box or I fall into that box. There are other factors, obviously, that are included in that, and so this is really meant just as an example. The only way that you'll know how much financial aid you're eligible for is to go through that application process. So again, I think some people kind of get stressed out by the sticker price or the total cost of attendance at schools, and I'm one who works at a high-cost private institution, so I meet with a lot of families who are surprised by the total cost of attendance and do have a little bit of sticker shock when they see what our tuition fees, room and board, books, and transportation, all of those expenses add up to be. So as the cost of attendance will vary at each school, the student at a higher cost institution is actually eligible for more financial aid. So if you look at this chart, you can see College D is probably your community college. And so the student has no eligibility for any financial aid there because the expected family contribution is $5,000 and the costs to attend that institution are less than $5,000. So the expected family contribution covers that. As you look at College A, you can see College A has a very high cost of attendance, but that green bar shows all of the financial aid that the student is eligible for at that institution. So don't have students, not apply to schools that do have that higher price tag because the student will be eligible for more financial aid potentially. And again, I just encourage students as they're applying to colleges, they're obviously applying to academically a safety school and a reach school, and I think that students should do the same financially. Apply to a school that you know that the family can afford, and apply to a school that is a financial reach for the family, and see what financial aid the student does receive. So I really love this graphic. We talk a lot about filling the barrel, or filling the bucket in financial aid. So here's our bucket. So the first thing that goes in there is the expected family contribution. So in this example, the cost of attendance is $40,000. We're going to pop in that $5,000 expected family contribution. And then the student received a scholarship and a grant and a student loan and some work study. So if you can do all of that math quickly in your head, you will see that there's $3,000 of what we call unmet need. So there's that additional amount. Now, a lot of times that unmet need can be filled in with those outside scholarships and awards that the student gets from the community or through some online resources. But at the end of the day, that $3,000 unmet need becomes the family responsibility as well. So while the expected family contribution is $5,000, in this example, the family actually would be required to pay $8,000. That unmet need becomes part of the family contribution. So the unmet eligibility can vary even when the cost of attendance is constant. And so students with the same expected family contribution can receive very different financial aid packages. And that's based on the student's strengths and the enrollment goals of the institution. I stress to students and families that if the student is going to a 2-year institution, families should make a 2-year plan. If the student is going to a 4-year institution, they should make a 4-year plan. I've met with so many students who come in and say, we're just gonna make it work this freshman year. We're gonna, liquidate this and do this, and we're gonna make it work, and it's really a struggle. And then the worst thing is then the student has to transfer sophomore year because they can't pay the bill. So really think about the total enrollment period that the student is planning on attending, and make that plan for that total amount. MEFA has some interactive college cost calculators once the student has those award letters. And again, just stressing the deadlines. I've definitely seen students, at least at Boston University, who could have been eligible for $50,000, and they just didn't do their forms on time. And so we ran out of money and were unable to award. Sometimes it's tens of thousands of dollars that students are missing out just for missing deadlines. So in this particular example here, you can see the unmet need is different based on the different scholarship amounts. So College C has offered a lower scholarship than College A. So really kind of looking at each section. So even if the cost of attendance is the same, looking at each line of those award letters is really important. As you continue to compare awards, this example shows that the cost of attendance and the total aid, but the components can vary. So again, looking at each line of those award letters is really important. So College A, you can actually see on the bottom line, it looks like the unmet need is $3,000 for all of the schools. So if you did a quick look at all this, you'd say, okay, well this is gonna cost us the same to send our child to any of these 3 schools. But if you look at the details of it, you can see that College A has offered a generous scholarship of $23,000, whereas College C has prepackaged a parent loan. So really, again, kind of looking at each line item of that award letter, seeing what amounts are grants, what amounts are loans, if there's work study in there as well, looking at each component. So now we're going to talk a little about paying for college. And families do pay for college in 3 ways. So the first is from past income, and that would be savings. The second piece is through current income. Schools often have a monthly payment plan that families can enroll in. And then the last piece is through student loans, and that would be future income that you would pay over time in the future. You don't have to choose just one, and I think most students and families do use a combination of all 3 when they are paying for school. And again, just thinking about that long-term plan. We always encourage students to take the federal Stafford loan first before taking out or either entertaining looking at any private loans that would be credit-based. The federal student loans do have limits, so freshmen are eligible for $5,500. Whether that's subsidized or unsubsidized depends on your FAFSA application. Sophomores are eligible for $6,500, and juniors and seniors are eligible for $7,500. If a parent takes out a Parent Plus loan and is denied that Parent Plus loan, the student is eligible for additional funding through the federal Stafford loan program. For this academic year, for 17-18, the fixed rate for that loan is 4.45%. So again, really low interest rates. There's a lot of deferment and income-based repayment options when the student graduates. So just a lot of options. It's a really, if you're thinking about any type of loans, we do encourage students to take that federal Stafford loan as a first option. So what do you think kind of is reasonable loan debt? And that's going to really be dependent on your family and your threshold for debt. The average debt for the class of 2016 was $37,172. And that's information from studentloanhero.com. But if the student does take all of their federal loans, that ends up being about $27,000. And just so you know what a monthly repayment will look like on that in the standard repayment plan is about $300 a month. So that's just something to consider as the student is thinking about how much loan debt they want to take and what those repayments will be and for how long. Students who are looking for additional loans in addition to the federal Stafford loans, those loans will be credit-based, and so it can either be in the parent's name or in the student's name with a co-borrower. Students typically don't have enough credit history at this point to be eligible for a student loan in their own name based on their own credit score and credit history. So in Massachusetts, there are some other options I'll just touch on briefly. Tuition break is a program that's offered. So if the student is interested in a specific area of study that is not available at any state school in Massachusetts, there are some other New England states and institutions that will allow in-state tuition for that out-of-state student if they're interested in that specific academic program. Mass transfer and the Commonwealth commitment are programs where the student can earn an associate's degree and then transfer to a four-year school and kind of lock in those earlier tuition amounts. In order to be eligible for the Commonwealth commitment, the student does need to be full-time and have continuous enrollment with a 3.0 GPA. So lastly, just a little bit more about some other free resources that are available. Again, I talked a little bit about that FAFSA day. There's a number of locations, a number of different dates all throughout the fall and the winter. So that's something you definitely can take advantage of. Different educational opportunity centers can offer free assistance. It's a good time to start looking at those outside scholarships. Sounds like from the school, that information is going to be available in March, but you can go ahead online. As I said, FastWeb, Good Call, on the MIFA website. There's a lot of scholarships that are available now, and like I said, kind of early bird gets the worm on a lot of that. So there is a lot of help that's available, and I also always say, if a student is applying to Boston University, the folks in my office would rather, if you have a question about something, that you go ahead and call us. Or send us an email. Even if the student hasn't been admitted yet, we're happy to kind of walk you through any questions that you have, answer any questions, and go through that process on the earlier end, rather than have the student come in April, as I said, and say, well, like, oh, I was confused about this, and so I waited and I didn't know if I could call. We'd rather have those calls now so that we can make sure that you're going through the process correctly and putting the correct information. So in addition, MIFA does offer understanding aid and paying the college bill seminars. Those will be available in March or April. So again, if you go ahead and get on MIFA's website or put your information on the bottom of that form, they'll get you on their mailing list and you'll be made aware of when those seminars are available. And those are kind of really designed to help students and families through that critical decision-making time period, kind of this most stressful time when you're looking at all of those 8 awards and really making those decisions of where the student is going to attend. And lastly, I just want to remind you, this is definitely something you can do. Don't go paying an accountant or someone else to fill out any of these forms for you. It takes a couple hours of your life, but you sit down, you get your tax information there and your bank account information, and if you focus on it, you can definitely get it done. There are a lot of resources to help you if you do feel like you need a little bit of extra assistance, but this is definitely something that you all can do. I know it seems like a lot of information, it seems overwhelming, but I promise you there's a lot of resources and folks that will help you through that. Now is really just a good time, I think, to talk, as a family, talk to your students about costs, expectations, thinking about how they're going to pay, what resources you're going to use. Go ahead and check out some of the calculators that are available online. And just, I mean, now that the FAFSA and the profile are available, we're after October 1st, you can go home tonight if you want and fill out those applications. And that is it. So now I'll take some time to answer any questions. I do want to encourage you again to fill out that evaluation form. Make sure you add my name on there so they know that it was me. But yeah.
Can you just clarify between an unsubsidized and subsidized loan and whether or not it's in the child's best interest for an unsubsidized loan to pay off the interest before the loan comes due?
Yeah, so great question. So the question was about the difference between the federal loans, unsubsidized and subsidized. So the difference is the subsidized loan is accruing interest, but the federal government is paying that while the student's in school. So the student won't be accruing any interest on that subsidized portion of the loan. The unsubsidized portion, the student will start to accrue interest. And so your second question was, is it beneficial then if the student is able, or if the family is able, to pay off some of that interest while the student's in school? And certainly if the student, you know, has a part-time job and they want to use that money to pay off that interest, then that interest won't be compounded and kind of capitalized at the end of that loan period. None of the payments are required to be paid while the student's in school. There's an in-school deferment for those federal loans, but certainly if the student does have money available and they do have an unsubsidized loan, that will reduce their overall indebtedness. So yeah, that's a great option if that's financially feasible for the family. Yeah.
I currently have an FSA. Do I need to get another one for my child?
So the student will need their own FSA ID. The question was about if the parent has their own FSA ID already, will the student need a separate one? And yes, so everybody kind of needs their own FSA ID in order to complete that.
We both needed one. So
Yep.
So if I can still utilize mine.
You can use your current one.
Okay. And then, sorry, I currently have student loans as well. How does that affect them? Do you know?
So the question was if a parent has student loans, are they federal student loans? So I think there's a place on the FAFSA to indicate if there's federal student loans. Like I said, unfortunately, any other kind of consumer debt or any other private loans are not factored in there, unfortunately, yeah.
So I don't know if I'm wording this correctly. When I start to fill out the FAFSA, do I need to have my daughter's ID at that point, or can I start filling it out while I'm waiting for her ID information?
So the question was, can I start to fill out the FAFSA without the student's FSA ID? I believe you can start to fill it out at any point, but in order to sign it and finalize it, you'll need that FSA ID to kind of verify that you are the one that input that information. It happens pretty quickly, the FSA ID. I think you know, I've done FAFSA nights in communities, and I've sat there with the parent and they input their email address, and you know, it takes 20 minutes or so to get that set up. But yeah, it's a pretty quick process, I believe. But you can go ahead and start that. You just won't be able to finalize it without that ID.
On the FSA ID, just kind of a follow-up on that, I presume as a parent, if you have multiple children that are going to be going, once you have one ID, you don't need to get another one.
Yeah, so the question was about the parent FSA ID. So you can use the same one for yourself, but the student will need their own. Speak again about the tax transcript. Yeah, so basically what's going to happen is everyone fills out the FAFSA, and the federal government is going to verify some of that information. And so a school like Boston University, we actually verify all students that are enrolled. So we're going to request the tax return information from every student that's enrolled at BU. Some of the state schools that have, a lot of students and they're just collecting the FAFSA, you're using the IRS data retrieval tool, they're making an assumption that you've put correct information on there, but the federal government will select some people for federal verification. And in that case, if you didn't do the IRS data retrieval, you will need to provide an IRS tax transcript. So in theory, you could enter wrong information on the FAFSA and they just want to verify that with actually what the IRS has. So the IRS will provide that tax transcript to the school, and then we'll take a look at that and verify that the information is correct. So that's why we just encourage people to use the data retrieval tool, and then the information. You didn't transpose a number, add a zero, you know that information came directly from the IRS. So the question is, you don't need the transcript if you use the data retrieval tool. And I think in some instances, a school could ask for the transcript anyways, even if you did use the data retrieval tool. So it kind of depends on the school, I think, in that situation. And like I said, at BU, we're going to collect your tax returns anyways. So it really, I think, depends on each individual school, whether or not they'll use the transcript or the actual tax return, or both in some instances. Yep, go ahead.
In the FAFSA, they send you information from the IRS in your mailbox saying that you applied, you did the lookup, so don't get panicked. When you get a thing from the IRS, it's about doing transfer of income from the IRS website. They send you a thing in the mail saying that you did it.
Okay, so yours is more of just a comment, so that you actually get something in the mail from the IRS saying that you filled that form out.
Don't get scared, because I
Okay. So no need to worry. They're on top of it.
If you have an income change from last, if you have an income change, let's say your commission base or whatever, you can call the school after the year starts or after you filled it out, tell them if it changed from your lookup dollar amount, your income went up or down. You can tell the institution that it changed, and they can adjust it based on that.
So that's a really good point too, actually. So we're using the 2016 tax data for those of you that will be filling out the FAFSA for next year. And for most people, they've done a lot of research on this, and income doesn't fluctuate that drastically one year to another for a majority of people. There are some, if you're commission-based, or even if there was a job loss, something like that in 2017, and that would qualify, as I said, as a special circumstance. So if you do feel like your 2017 taxes, even though you haven't completed them yet, will be significantly less than your 2016 data, I would encourage you to contact each individual school and let them know that, and provide any documentation that you have stating that difference in the income. That's a great point, thank you.
How do we turn these?
I'm sorry?
How do we turn these into
The evaluation form? I think there's just going to be a box or a spot on that table, so you can fill that out and drop those off. I know MIFA does really take a look at all of the data that you put on there and make some changes. So, yeah.
I just want to make, my daughter is currently a freshman in college, and some of the scholarship applications asked with her SAR report. So just when you fill out the FAFSA, print that at the end if you can, because you might need that at some point or something else.
Yep, that's another great point too, that some, and actually, Amy said that you do have to fill out the FAFSA to be eligible for any of the scholarships here, and so it is a good idea to just, hang on to all of your documents as you're filling this out throughout the process, make yourself a little binder, but it's a good idea to just have that on hand in case someone does want to see that in order to give you an outside scholarship, sure.
For the in-state tuition for the out-of-state schools, how do we go about finding
I'm going to reference my large page of notes on that. I'm not super familiar with this program, but... Okay, so the question was about that tuition break. So if the student is interested in studying a specific program that is not offered at any state school in Massachusetts, and it is offered at a state school in another qualifying New England state, the student can get in-state tuition at that out-of-state institution.
But if you switch your major,
Right.
you go back to out-of-state
Correct.
tuition.
So if the student has a very specific thing that they're interested in studying that is only available at, some school, public school in Maine, as long as that student is studying that very specific program at a state school in Maine, I'm using Maine as an example, I have no idea if they're one of the qualifying schools, but you can get in-state tuition for that out-of-state school, but again, only if they're studying that specific major.
The University of Maine has really been promoting
Oh,
it, actually.
All right, perfect. I made that up.
So if they're interested in going there, you should really look into it because they're offering a lot of programs there for in-state tuition for Massachusetts residents.
Great. Maine, check it out. Go skiing.
It's the accepting school that offers that.
Yes.
It's nothing to do with Massachusetts.
It's the accepting school. Mhm, mhm. All right, well, I'll hang out down here for a couple minutes if anyone has any additional questions that they want to ask me. Again, good luck with everything. I promise you'll be all right. It's a lot of information, but ask questions if you do have them. Thank you.